The first thing Captain Dana Cole noticed was that the dark between the stars looked textured, like velvet brushed the wrong way. The second thing was that her coffee didn't tremble when the proximity alarms went off. On the bridge of the ECS Asteria, 200 meters of exploratory optimism and duct-taped ingenuity, she watched an armada slide out of that velvet night. Angular silhouettes, gunmetal fins, thousands of running lights like a drifting constellation rearranging itself into a threat. Her crew stiffened, her coffee stayed steady. She set it gently in the cup ring and said, "Open a line, please, before someone decides we're a problem." The voice that answered was made of gravel and rules. "Unknown vessel, you have violated Dominion exclusion space. State allegiance or be annihilated." On the forward screen, a four-eyed being glared from a throne that seemed welded from the bones of ships. Around him, data glyphs pulsed like slow heartbeats. Lieutenant Juno Park murmured from navigation, "Position doesn't match any chart. Our jump pushed us beyond the mapped arm." Dr. Keisha Rao, Xenoculture, leaned into her console with the curiosity that had torpedoed a dozen of her sleep schedules. Their formation is theatrical. They want our fear before they want our compliance. Dana smoothed the creases on her uniform as if she were stepping into a city council meeting, not into a crosshair. "Good day," she said when the channel stabilized. "I'm Captain Dana Cole of the Earth Civil Service ship Asteria. We appear to have made a navigational error with an experimental drive. We'd appreciate help identifying local charts and, if it's not too much trouble, directions." The four eyes blinked in sequence. He had expected choking terror, bargaining, or at least bluster. He got a PTA voice asking for a street map. "I am High Marshal Rex of the Vrax Dominion 3rd Spear," he growled at last. "You are surrounded by 500 warships. You will power down and prepare to be boarded." Dana considered that like a person comparing grocery brands. "We don't actually have weapons to power down," she said, glancing toward Chief Engineer Sato, who gave a small, honest shrug. "We do have a geological laser for sampling rock strata. Also a coffee machine which, if your people are interested, produces a beverage key to the success of many human endeavors." On Rex's flag deck, junior officers stopped pretending not to listen. The battle psychologist, a severe Vraxian with a forehead tattoo of campaign stars, tapped notes into a slate. Anomalous calm. Unknown deterrent. Dr. Rao stepped into frame with the serene intensity of a professor about to turn a lecture into a field trip. "Your ships are remarkable," she said, eyes bright. "There's a deliberate asymmetry in the hull geometry, part intimidation, part sensor occlusion. It's a beautiful cultural signal. Would a request for a non-classified overview of your propulsion philosophy be inappropriate at first contact?" Silence moved between the ships like a tide. Rex tried again, slower, as if speaking to a bomb. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of force aligned against you?" Dana nodded, genuinely impressed. "Yes, your formation work is excellent. It must take decades to rehearse at that scale. If there's a designated first contact ministry, we'd prefer to talk with them. I'd hate to clog your battle channels with logistics about docking lanes and allergy accommodations. We have one peanut allergy on board." On Asteria, Juno whispered, "Is the captain treating this like airport security?" Comms specialist Miguel Ortega whispered back, "If they ask us to take our shoes off, I'm filing a grievance." Dana clasped her hands behind her back and let the ordinary calm of procedure fill the room. "High Marshal," she said, "we're lost. We're curious and we'd like to make a good impression. If you escort us, we'll follow politely, take notes, and file the appropriate paperwork. Do you prefer us ahead of the column or tucked in the middle? We are very good at staying in our lane." Rex cut the line. He stared at the dots representing his fleet, then at the single polite dot asking for directions. He had spent a lifetime turning fear into policy. Fear made enemies simple. Anger made them useful. But this was neither. This was customer service. After a long moment, he reopened the channel. "Follow my escorts to Kark's Prime. Any deviation will be destroyed." Dana dipped her head as if she'd just been shown to a table at a crowded diner. "Thank you, we'll keep the coffee warm." As the Dominion armada folded around the Asteria like a school of armored whales, Dr. Rao's hands danced. "Record everything," she said, half to herself, half to the academy she hoped would read her someday. Architecture, formations, symbolic design, culture shapes weapons, weapons shape culture. Pull all bands, Miguel. Dana stood with the comfortable weight of responsibility settling between her shoulder blades. If there was fear inside her, she saved it for later. First contact was a craft. You used the right words, the right tone, and sometimes, if you were lucky, the universe blinked and blinked again and decided not to kill you. 3 days to Kark's prime, Rex had said. 3 days in which the Vrax Dominion would watch a human crew act like tourists under a death sentence, and feel something more corrosive than defiance working under their armor. Doubt. Kark's prime rose like a threat sculpted into a planet. Spearspire cities punched at the sky, fortresses clutched cliffs like barnacles made of knives, and landing pads shaped like stylized predator skulls waited in orderly ranks. As Asteria settled onto a pad rimmed with bronze teeth, the welcoming committee arrived. A forest of 7-foot soldiers in scaled armor, halberds that were guns, and guns that were also speeches. Protocol teams had spent generations tuning this choreography to a single emotion: intimidation. Captain Dana Cole stepped into the furnace-bright plaza as if she were walking into a public library. "Thank you for the escort," she told the commander in charge, a towering Vraxian named Commander Tserk, whose voice had 3 growls before every word. "Your parade discipline is excellent. The symmetry of the spear line is quite moving." She meant it. Human ceremony did different things with symmetry. Seeing the Vraxian version was like hearing a familiar chord in another key. "Doctor." Keisha Rao's scanner thrummed to life, tasting wavelengths and naming them. "Note the recurring motif of victory banners hung above choke points," she murmured for the recorder. "Psych architecture, compress the visitor's line of sight, saturate with conquered iconography, then widen into a triumphal reveal, effective at producing scale humility." Miguel orbited the group like a friendly drone, tagging pictographs, catching the rhythm of shouted commands. Juno, allowed on the ground team, kept his eyes moving and his hands away from anything that looked ceremonial. He had the jumpy dignity of someone trying not to knock over an expensive vase. Inside the Hall of Edicts, intimidation became design language. Murals of conquests in alloys that swallowed light. Trophy rooms where weapons from 100 species were pinned like butterflies. An audience chamber where the floor reflected your face, but the ceiling swallowed your voice. At the far end, on a dais built from the hull plates of defeated dreadnoughts, sat Archstrategos Vekon, Supreme Director of the Dominion's war apparatus, wrapped in a cloak that looked like stitched starfields. "You will explain your presence," Vekon thundered, the sound engineered to skitter down vertebrae. Dana stepped to the marked circle, exposed on a disk of light, and introduced her team as if signing in at a conference: names, roles, intentions. "We are explorers," she said. "We got lost. We would like to get unlost and to leave you with a portfolio of goodwill in the process. We have a preliminary cultural brief, if your office wants a draft." The War Council waited for the pleading to start. Instead, Dr. Rao lifted a holosheet and with a scholar's courtesy asked permission to cite several murals in a monograph about military aesthetics. Vekon's 4 pupils dilated, then narrowed. "Do you not grasp your position?" he demanded. "We can atomize you with a gesture." "We grasp it," Dana said, her voice as calm as laminated policy. "Fear won't make our charts any more accurate. Procedure will." Commander Tserk shifted. On the shadow-swept balcony where Dominion psychologists perched like crows, styluses scratched, no fear display, confidence source unknown, hypothesis hidden deterrent. But every query they thrust into the humans struck the same soft, infuriating wall: professionalism. Vekon offered the script hammered into Dominion bones. submit as client species, or be destroyed as an example. Dana and Miguel exchanged a look that held 1,000 staff meetings. "We'd prefer independence," Dana said, "but we are open to trade protocols, cultural exchanges, and non-aggression frameworks. If you have a template, we can start from that. If not, we have a standard of contact doc we can adapt to your terms." The chamber didn't breathe for 3 full heartbeats. Then the whispers began, the sibilant panic of a culture whose only verbs were dominate and burn, confronted by a grammar with words like neighbor and optional. Dr. Rao, seeing the eddies of alarm, tried to anchor the conversation in competence. "Your integrated intimidation architecture shows remarkable socio-technical unity," she said. "I'd be grateful for archive access so I can avoid mislabeling your eras. In exchange, I can share human case studies on de-escalatory urban design." Vraxian aides wrote de-escalatory like it was a curse that might be useful later. The humans were given quarters. Given meant escorted past 5 concentric kill boxes to a suite windowed onto a garden of knives. They were guests, which meant watched by cameras and by people who didn't blink. The Asteria sat in a cradle surrounded by towers with names like Teeth and Verdict. In the mess that night, Dana drank her coffee and built a schedule out loud. Interviews, observation, requests framed as academic courtesies. "We behave like what we are," she said, "because if we behave like what they expect, we will become that." Word traveled faster than light travels in gossip. In barracks and canteens, among the conquered and the conquerors, the story appeared with new feathers every hour. The humans who didn't kneel, the captain whose heart rate stayed steady at the foot of the dais, the scholar who praised their murals like a friend of the dead. Some said the humans had a weapon so clean you never felt it until your empire was missing. Some said they were scouts for a federation whose maps were made of oaths instead of borders. In the lower decks of the flagship, a technician whispered. They asked for directions, and her bunkmate laughed until he realized he wasn't sure why that terrified him. The demonstration was supposed to end the conversation. At dawn, the Dominion flung its sky open. Carriers rose like continents. Cruisers stitched contrails into geometry. Fighters braided themselves into lethal lace. Cannons woke, each charge a sun rehearsing fury. The formation around Asteria hardened into an instructional painting. This is what happens to those who refuse, rendered in mass and doctrine. On the observation tier, the humans stood with notebooks and sensors like docents at a pop-up museum. Dana nodded appreciation at the timing. Miguel captured comms rhythms. Juno tracked spacing and drift. Dr. Rao, incandescent, whispered into a recorder. Observe, intimidation synchronized with competence. They threaten without jitter. They have turned fear into choreography. Commander Tserk waited for begging. He got questions. What bandwidth do you reserve for formation integrity checks? Miguel asked, polite as a customer survey. How do you correct oscillation in the outer ring without telegraphing to the inner ring? Juno added. Is the chromatic modulation on those energy discharges purely spectacle, or is it a crew readiness cue? Dr. Rao asked, halfway between reverence and professional nosiness. Tserk answered before he could stop himself. He heard his own voice explaining things to aliens who should have been kneeling. The breakpoint came not with a taunt, but with a compliment wrapped around a thought. Juno, eyes narrowed at a fighter weave that tightened then flared, said softly, You know, if someone seeded a distributed sensor lattice out past your screen, cheap, dumb drones trading timing, you'd get a predictive shadow of your formation decisions. Not a kill, but a counter for the intimidation value. It's beautiful work. That's why the pattern is legible. Silence hit the tier like a dropped blade. Across the fleet, junior officers stopped watching the humans and started watching their commanders. If a lost species could read you this quickly, what did they see when they looked longer? On the flag bridge, High Marshal Rex flicked a glance toward the battle psychologist. The man's slate now read in sharp glyphs. They analyze because they can afford to. They do not fear because they know. Vekon's jaw tightened until the scar there went white. For an hour, the Dominion tried to frighten the humans back into a shape the Dominion understood. The humans refused to be frightened and worse, refused to be impressed in the way the script demanded. They were impressed like engineers, like teachers. "You should be very proud of this," Dana said into an open line, and for a second it sounded like a mother at a recital, and every commander who had built a career on being the monster in the story felt something crack. Afterward, an order moved through the fleet: end demonstration. Return the guests to quarters. Suspend observation privileges. The escort back was tighter, jumpier, full of glances. In the corridor, Dana murmured to Dr. Rao, "Stress indicators." Rao nodded, widened stances, micro-tremors in hands, a fractional lag between command and echo. "They worked very hard to make us afraid," Rao said. "We declined. Now they are afraid of what that means." Panic breeds theories the way damp breeds mold. In the factories of Gamma Lentis, overseers whispered that the humans were teaching counter-intimidation to the annexed. On mining moons where the Dominion's anthem played at dawn and dusk, prisoners mouthed a new refrain. They didn't flinch. Vraxian governors asked for reinforcements they did not need because fear loves company. In the war apparatus, memos turned to warnings turned to briefings with edges. Assume human scouting role. Assume clandestine superiority. The evidence. 3 calm faces and a notebook full of questions. Back in their suite, Asteria's team uploaded clean files and unspooled the day into professional language. "Tomorrow we request archive access again," Rao said. "We frame it as respect. We keep saying we are what we are." Dana agreed. "And someone needs to say out loud in their language that we are not a threat," Miguel added. "They won't believe it the first time." "That's all right," Dana said. "Truth isn't always for the first hearing." What the humans didn't see, what they couldn't, was the emergency session where the Dominion finally gave their fear a name. "We have spent 8 centuries mastering intimidation," said a senior strategist with a voice like a lock engaging. "We have no doctrine for those who are immune." The word immune crawled across the table, small and venomous. Vekon looked into it and saw an empire with nothing to say to a world that did not tremble. Dana asked for a private audience because everything else felt like theater. The request startled the secretaries of terror who managed Vekon's calendar. It unnerved the security men whose eyes had forgotten how to be merely eyes. But curiosity is a treacherous ally, and the Dominion had it in more supply than it admitted. 20 minutes later, Dana stood before the arch-strategos on a floor polished to the point of erasing shadows. "We may be speaking past each other," she began, professional compassion in the corners of her mouth. "We came lost and curious. You received us with doctrine. Our behavior has not mapped to your expectations. That alone seems to have created." She chose the smallest word capable of carrying the load, a miscommunication. Vekon's cloak rustled like night moving across a field. "You deny being a threat," he said, as if reporting a lab result he distrusted. "To whom?" Dana asked. "To whoever requires fear to function," he said, and the honesty in it surprised them both. She opened a holosheet. Scenes rose, Earth's Antarctic stations in blue light, a Mars dome at breakfast, a trade mission shaking hands across a table cluttered with cables and tea. "When humans meet a new civilization, we study," Dana said. "Not to find weak points, to find points. We document etiquette so we don't offend. We map power so we don't step on throats by accident. We ask for directions because we don't like being lost." She flipped to a new sheet, diagrams of agreements, the bones of cooperation laid out like anatomy. There are ways of being strong that do not require someone else to be smaller. Vekon had been raised on a story where strength and subjugation were synonyms. It had seemed tidy. Looking at the human diagrams, alliances built out of mutual benefit instead of terror, he felt, for the first time, the untidy possibility that his vocabulary had been constraining his thought. "And you're calm?" he asked. "A tactic. A training," Dana said. "Panic is a thief, procedure pays, fear never tightened a gasket properly." He let himself imagine it, a navy drilled for competence rather than theater, governors measured by quiet prosperity rather than tribute tonnage, the war apparatus as a spine, not a fist. Then he imagined the men he would have to convince, men who had sewn their identity into banners of conquest, who had taught their children that trembling was the correct response to the anthem. "If I stand the fleets down," he said slowly, "my enemies will call it weakness." Dana didn't flinch. Give them a different word. Call it reprioritization. Call it operational recalibration. You decide the words. You have all the stages. Outside the chamber, the Dominion shook itself like a war dog. On Gamma Lentis, a prison overseer rehearsed brutality in case the rumors were true. In the lower decks of the flagship, a junior officer drafted a transfer request he would never submit. In conquered districts where statues threw long morning shadows, people listened to the news feeds with a hope so small it hid in the breath. Inside, Vekon did something that felt like removing armor that had grown under his skin. He opened a line to High Marshal Rex. "Stand down crisis posture," he said, each syllable a bridge he had not known he could build. "Maintain readiness, cease demonstrations, inform governors that the guests are to be treated as diplomatic parties." Rex, who had built a career on the clean geometry of compliance, said, "Understood," and did not understand at all. When the line closed, Vekon looked at Dana as if seeing a shape he hadn't studied before. "Humans," he said, tasting the plural, the idea that she was not an anomaly but a sample. "What do you want from the galaxy?" Dana thought of her crew asleep in shifts, of Dr. Rao tracing unfamiliar alphabets with reverent fingers, of Miguel cooking too much rice because he didn't trust local starch. "To learn," she said, "to trade, to be good neighbors and defend ourselves when we must, to send our children somewhere better than we found, to make maps that are also promises." He sat back, cloak settling. "We have made maps that are warnings," he said. "Perhaps we have mistaken volume for meaning." She let the line sit between them until it cooled into something usable. "If you permit," Dana added, "Dr. Rao would like access to a small portion of your cultural archives. We will follow all protocol. We will submit our notes for review before dissemination." He almost laughed. The war apparatus had survived 1,000 saboteurs. It had no defense against courtesy. When Dana left, the guards looked taller and smaller at once. In the Garden of Knives, wind threaded the blades, making a sound like distant rain. Back in their suite, she told her crew, "We are not out of danger, but the conversation is different now." Miguel grinned a tired grin. "I'll make a larger pot," he said. "If we're going to accidentally reform an empire, we shouldn't do it under-caffeinated." "Doctor," Rao, eyes shining, whispered. He asked questions. Across Kark's Prime, orders fanned out on channels usually reserved for war, stand-down demonstrations, normalize posture, prepare for diplomatic frameworks. Some commanders obeyed with relief they would not admit. Some obeyed with the practiced resentment of men who hated changing scripts. Some did not obey at all. In the midnight corridors of the war apparatus, a different meeting convened, shoulders heavy with old certainties. The hard circle, men and women whose identities were braided to conquest, traced a new contingency. If the arch-strategos continued his deviation, if the humans continued their contamination, if the conquered continued to whisper, then a correction would be required. They selected a time, a place, a pretext dressed as policy. They named it Clause Black, and on the pad rimmed with bronze teeth, Asteria slept under lights that pretended to be stars, her crew dreaming of charts home, a leader dreaming of maps that were promises, an empire dreaming, fitfully, of a future where the anthem did not insist on trembling. They called it Clause Black because old regulations loved tidy names for ugly ideas. The plan was simple, practiced, and deniable. A shaped charge under a maintenance gantry 2 pads over from Asteria, a burst of falsified traffic that looked like human signals, a brief security blackout for recalibration, and then righteous fury. The story would write itself. Treacherous guests, prudent crackdown, the war apparatus restored to the center of the world. The blackout hit at local midnight. Lights thinned to bruised red. Cameras blinked once and pretended to sleep. On the service scaffold, the device rested like a second heart. Inside the human suite, Miguel Ortega looked up from his console as the ambient hum changed pitch. He didn't reach for a weapon they didn't have. He reached for procedure. "Log begins," he said, voice steady into the recorder. "Power fluctuation, requesting confirmation." Juno Park slid to the window, eyes mapping sight lines the way other men map streets. "Doctor." Keisha Rao did what she always did, watch the people. In the hallway, the guard's shoulders had dropped a fraction. Shoulders know before faces do. Captain Dana Cole made 3 calls in the time it takes a kettle to go from quiet to whisper. To port operations, to Commander Tserk's office, to the neutral archive liaison whose job was to hate surprises. She kept her voice the same size for all 3. "We are initiating open view protocol," she said. "All body cams live, all audio mirrored to neutral buffers, all timestamps cross-hashed. If something happens, you will see it happen with us." Tserk wasn't in on Clause Black. He wasn't not in on it either. The war apparatus taught officers to leave doors unexamined if opening them would make life complicated. Watching Dana's feed bloom across his console, clean angles, clean hearts, he felt a new complication, admiration. At pad 12, 2 Vraxian techs pulled a panel to check a fault. One of them found the device because fear had made his fingers clumsy. He froze, hand hovering, throat making the small sound of people meeting the wrong future. The operations handler, hidden 3 decks up, hissed in his ear, "Proceed." The tech's other hand moved for the trigger. Juno didn't see the device. He saw the tech's posture, the angle of her wrist, the way attention narrows to a point when it should be wide. "Captain," he said, "left hand press pattern." Dana was already speaking into the open port. "Pad 12, this is Captain Cole. Please step back from the orange panel. Your left hand is shaking. You're about to make a mistake that kills bystanders who have nothing to do with your orders." On every channel, observers who had been trained to hear defiance heard something else, care. The tech's eyes flicked to a camera he didn't know was awake, then to the device he did not want to touch. He stepped back. So did his partner, relief arriving like air after a long dive. In the handler's ear, a new voice intruded, the gravel and rules of High Marshal Rex. "Abort," Rex said, because abort was cheaper than explaining to the arch-strategos why his midnight had exploded. Security poured in, performing a chore they had rehearsed for centuries. Control the scene, control the story, control the aftermath. Dana let them. She also asked for a forensic audit with third-party observers and offered the humans footage under chain of custody. "We want what you want," she told a stone-faced investigator whose rank marks glittered like frost. "A real answer." Tserk watched late men do early morning work, sealing evidence, stamping packets, writing reports with careful verbs. He sent 2 orders that would have gotten a junior officer reassigned to a quiet border, save the human feed and lock the handler's channel history. He did not ask his own heart why it had chosen sides. By dawn, the story could have hardened, treacherous guests, prudent crackdown. Instead, something softer and more dangerous spread. A clip of Dana warning a stranger's shaking hand, a diagram doctor. Rao annotated to explain how to read stress posture in a way that might save a dock worker's life. Miguel's commentary on why open view existed and why most civilians should copy it. In the war apparatus, the hard circle licked its wounds and called the failure a near miss. In the barracks, technicians who had seen the body cam angle called it a miracle. In the lower decks, a rumor with legs learned to run. The humans had saved Dominion lives during a Dominion operation designed to kill the humans and then say protocol. Even lies have taste buds. This one found the truth too sweet to spit out. When the sun found the edges of Kark's Prime's knife garden, Arch-Strategos Vekon summoned Rex and Tserk and the head of internal safeguards. He played the human feed without comment. He let the silence do the work first. "What would our doctrine have required if they had died?" he asked at last. Ritual reprisals and a return to form, Rex said, not proud of the answer. And what exactly did these unarmed guests do? Vekon asked. Followed procedure, Tserk said, and couldn't keep the respect out of his voice. Vekon nodded once, a man feeling a lever move under his own hand. Then we will follow theirs, he said. Open view, open audit. Let the Empire see us watch ourselves. The hard circle heard the order and called it weakness. In districts where statues watched avenues, people called it news. In the human suite, Dr. Rao brewed the coffee she had promised to share. When the door chimed, she found Tserk standing there with the awkward gravity of a man visiting a library for the first time. She handed him a cup. He sniffed, sipped, and made a face he would later deny making. It's an acquired taste, Miguel said cheerfully. So is accountability, Dana added, and nobody argued. The audit unfolded in a room designed to bully witnesses, tall ceiling, thin benches, cold light that wanted to make everyone look guilty. Open view had changed the staging. Holoscreens floated for all to see, human feeds, port feeds, internal logs, each image framed by hash signatures like seals. The crowd that was not supposed to be there watched anyway, because truth loves company even more than fear does. Internal safeguards began with a question as old as power. Why were you recording? Miguel didn't try to be clever, because we always record, not to catch you, to catch ourselves if we panic. He tapped the console. We publish our mistakes faster than our victories. It keeps our muscles honest. A Vraxian attendant, inked from jaw to collarbone with service oaths, leaned forward despite herself. Muscles honest. The phrase did something under her armor. They walked through the timeline the way engineers walk through a failure. Slow, kind, ruthless. The falsified traffic. The camera blink. The tech's shaking hand. The handler's hiss. The abort. Each piece clicked into place with the satisfying ugliness of comprehension. At each turn, Dana resisted the easy line. She did not say conspiracy even when the shape of one sharpened in the room. She said conditions, incentives, doctrine. She said, when the only hammer you own is intimidation, even a guest looks like a nail. Vekon listened from the dais like a student who had decided, overnight, to like school. Rex kept glancing at Tserk as if seeing him in a new light. The hard circle sat in the back row, working the math of disruption. If they could not kill the guests, then they must kill the audit, the trust, the process that made the guests dangerous. So they tried a different tack. Your lieutenant proposed vulnerabilities in our fleet formations, a prosecutor said, pouncing like a cat that knows the furniture plan. Is that not hostile analysis? Juno didn't shrink. It's analysis, he said. Hostility is intent plus method. We meant respect. If you train hard enough, you see patterns. We complemented the art by taking it seriously. Dr. Rao leaned in. Where I come from, pointing out a weakness is a gift you give a friend before an enemy finds it. She let the word friend hang there as if it were a normal thing to call one's host. Maybe it could be. The audit chair, a woman whose rank glyphs were older than Tserk's career, rubbed her temple the way people do when they hear something obvious for the first time. And you're calm? She asked Dana. Can it be taught? Dana offered the smallest smile in a hard room. We teach it to kids in shop class so they don't lose fingers. We teach it to pilots so they don't turn good air into bad decisions. We can teach it to anyone who likes keeping what they love alive. The crowd's sound changed texture. It wasn't approval, it was want. The hard circle made its move at the break. A whisper flooded through friendly channels. Humans humiliate Dominion commanders in public court. And a staged outburst near the plaza of verdicts to justify temporary restrictions on foreign dissemination. They expected panic. They got boring logistics. Dana had anticipated the smear. While safeguards argued about toggles and press ranges, she submitted a distribution plan no one had thought to draft. Sequential releases of footage annotated with joint commentary, time-boxed cue and a windows for garrison schools, technical glossaries for workers who would watch on cracked screens during lunch. It's not about winning the moment, she told Vekon in a side room that smelled faintly of machine oil. It's about giving people handles so they can carry the truth home. Handles, he repeated, as if discovering the useful end of a tool he had been hitting things with for years. The afternoon session turned from blame to design. What replaces claws black when you retire it? What does an empire do when intimidation stops pulling its own weight? Dr. Rao pulled up case studies from human history that were not flattering to humans because honesty is ballast. Labor councils that prevented bloodshed by teaching negotiation. Safety boards that saved more lives than any sword. Cities that stopped rewarding leaders for volume and started rewarding them for uptime. War makes you good at urgency, she said. Good governance makes you good at maintenance. Vekon surprised his own aides by asking for a pilot program right there on the record. 3 districts, 2 fleets, independent oversight with citizens on the roster. Rex added a practical clause. The war apparatus would keep its teeth, but it would log every bite. Serk volunteered to stand the watch that turns a promise into a procedure. The chair banged her staff once. The pilot was law until it wasn't. When the session ended, the plaza did not erupt. People went back to their shifts thinking about handles, about muscles honest, about maintenance. The hard circle watched the quiet and understood, with the special horror of those who love noise, that quiet is what change sounds like when it knows how to work. That night in the human suite, Miguel stirred a pot of rice he had bartered from a dock worker who wanted to tell someone his father's story. Juno recalibrated a sensor by hand because old habits do not retire themselves. Dr. Rao, tipsy on access permits, sent a note to the archive. I will not publish anything without your context. Knowledge without context is cruelty. Dana checked on each of them like a ship's small gravity, then stared at a map of the Dominion and drew, on a pad she never showed anyone, 3 circles where a pilot program might survive its own birth. In the lower decks, Serk sent a quiet message to a sergeant he trusted more than policy. Find me the men who wrote claws black. Do not arrest. Watch. I want to learn how they move before we teach them how to stop. The pilot needed a test not written by its authors. The universe obliged. Varan 9 was a client world the Dominion called a resource partner, and the locals called home. The mines ran hot, the harvests ran thin, and the anthem played twice a day over speakers strung like wire between tired roofs. It was perfect for the first promise Vekon was brave enough to make. An exchange visit with human observers, an inspection of safety rails and pay stubs and the 1,000 small levers that turned dignity into a budget line. The hard circle chose it for a different reason. If they could turn an exchange into a riot, they could feed the pilot to its own paperwork. Dana brought a small team, Miguel for communications, Dr. Rao to keep the story honest, Juno to see the angles others miss. Serk came because someone had to wear the uniform and mean it in a new way. Rex stayed in orbit with enough ships to scare stupid into caution and enough restraint to make restraint a visible thing. They landed at noon. The greeting committee was not a spear line. It was a nervous administrator, 3 elders in stitched shawls, a boy who stared at Asteria as if it were a story he might grow into. Dr. Rao asked for the kitchen first because change tastes better when it smells like onions and bread. Miguel set up an open mic on the plaza and labeled it complaint box because words matter. Later he crossed it out and wrote wish list because words matter more. They toured the mine. They asked questions with curiosity instead of accusation. How many shift rotations per family? What happens when a tool breaks and no replacement arrives? Who approves the safety budget and who signs for it when the month runs out? Rao listened like a midwife. Juno watched the catwalks. On the ridge above the site, a cargo skiff idled without a flight plan. Inside, 3 men who had learned to love simple answers unpacked a plan shaped like a tragedy. Push a support strut, drop a walkway, blame the panic on foreign agitators, film the tears, restore the old order with a hymn and a baton. They called it civic cleanse on a channel that liked euphemism. Juno saw the glint first, a lens catching the sun the wrong way. He didn't shout. He folded his voice small enough to lay in Dana's ear. Ridge, 10 o'clock. Intent is collapse. Dana did not run. running turns crowds into weapons. She walked to the foreman, a woman with hands like quarried stone, and asked for her whistle. "You won't stop them," the foreman said, as if stating the weather. "No," Dana agreed, "but we can give people instructions." She climbed a pile of scrap until faces found her. "This is Captain Cole. We have a structural issue on the east catwalk. Nobody panic. Panic is a liar. Crew A, step back 5 paces and secure your lines. Crew B, lock your harness and hold steady. Everyone on the plaza, breathe like you're blowing dust from a book, slow. If you do not have a job, your job is to wait." Tserk's voice hit the ridge like a quiet storm. "Skiff on ridge, this is Commander Tserk of the War Apparatus. You are operating without a plan and with hostile intent. Power down and hold positions. You are being recorded by 3 jurisdictions and 2 gods." On the skiff, one man laughed until the shape of his life felt small. He shoved the strut anyway because doctrine is a gravity some men cannot escape. The metal groaned and tried to remember integrity. The walkway sagged and did not fall. The foreman had been teaching her crews to double pin after a cousin slipped 2 winters ago. "Muscles honest," she said under her breath as if the words had come to her in a dream. Juno was already moving, but moving like a person and not like a hero. Step, test, clip, brace, call the names of the 3 workers in danger so their minds would come back to their bodies. Miguel narrated into the open mic the way medics talk to the newly concussed. "You're here. We're here. This is the part where you breathe." Up on the ridge, Tserk's patrol put a hold on the skiff's engines with a technique that looked enough like force to satisfy his training and enough like restraint to satisfy the new rule he wanted to be true about himself. They took the men alive because dead men don't learn. Later, in the shade of a porch that had seen too many hard summers, Vekon's pilot program held its first public review. The elders spoke. The foreman swore with a grace that made Miguel blush. The nervous administrator, freed for an hour from needing to be an instrument, wept once and then found the spine under his paperwork. Dr. Rao wrote names, not numbers, in a margin and circled it twice. They wrote a small agreement on a table sticky with T. Transparent budget for rails and boots. Worker reps with the power to halt a line without punishment. A complaint box that would keep its second name because wish is the first step of a plan. A school exchange where Dominion kids would learn to audit like their lives depended on it because sometimes they did. Tserk signed with a hand that wanted to shake and didn't. In orbit, Rex watched the telemetry of a world declining to riot and felt something he had not felt since he was a junior officer with a dented breastplate and a clean dream. Relief that did not require anyone to kneel. The hard circle sent a message that night. A simple image, Claus Black's glyph burned over a map of the pilot districts. Rex forwarded it to Safeguards, to Vekon, to Tserk, and to Dana with the dry caption of a man reclaiming humor from fear. "They are learning to be obvious." Dana sat on Asteria's ramp with her coffee cooling toward the air. The boy who had stared at the ship asked if space tasted like metal. "Sometimes," she said, "sometimes it tastes like new bread." He considered that and nodded like a man filing a fact he might test someday. "First promise kept," Miguel said, counting audits instead of victories. "First promise made," Dana corrected gently. "We keep it by coming back." The pilot grew the way good things do, slowly with arguments. Schools asked annoying questions about open view that made Safeguards better or at least more articulate. Minds filed for more rails than budgets liked, then found the money in line items previously labeled glory. In the war apparatus, 24 officers retired early because the new verbs did not fit the old mouths. 3 stayed because they wanted to learn new grammar. On Kark's Prime, statues continued to throw long shadows. People began to walk in them differently. The hard circle made one last play to set the calendar back to angry. They leaked a doctored clip of Juno's formation analysis tied to a forged memo titled Human Counter-Strike Plan. It was slick work with ugly edges. For a day, feeds jittered and men who love posture sharpened theirs. Then the handles did what handles do. Safeguards posted the original footage with joint annotations. The Academy released a primer on how to spot a bad edit written for 15-year-olds. Serk recorded a message in his parade voice that somehow sounded like a kitchen table voice, explaining what he, personally, had learned from being wrong. The clip died not with a bang, but with a fizzle that embarrassed the men who had bet on it. Rumors prefer the shape of truth when the truth has been made easy to carry. Vekon convened the war apparatus in a chamber that had heard too many declarations. He did not declare, he proposed. "We keep the fleets," he said, "but we document the doctrine that says when they sleep. We keep the anthem, but we change a line so it does not require trembling to sing. We keep the maps, but we add a layer called promises, treaties, audits, kitchens where inspectors eat with the inspected because that is where fear loses calories. We will be mocked. I propose we survive the mockery." Rex seconded. Serk volunteered his career again. The chair banged her staff twice. The pilot became policy subject to renewal by a thing the Dominion had not tried in a long time, consent. The embassy talk began without anyone daring to call it an embassy. The word they used was desk. Earth would maintain a desk on Kark's Prime staffed by people who liked filling out forms and showing their work. The Dominion would maintain a desk on Earth staffed by people who could look at a history that did not flatter them and keep their lunch. Exchanges would begin with archivists and safety officers, not generals. Children would swap school projects about maintenance schedules and how to argue without breaking a chair. On departure day, the plaza did not look like a parade. It looked like a shift change, sleeves rolled, eyes bright with the rarest fuel, interest. Archstrategos Vekon stood with Rex and Serk and the foreman from Varan 9, who had insisted on attending because signatures mean more when the hands are real. Dana faced them with the tidy gravity of a captain who knows leaving is a kind of promise, too. "We brought you coffee," Miguel said, because culture moves on small gifts. Serk accepted the bag as if it were a medal and then, to his own surprise, smiled in public. Dr. Rao handed Vekon a thin book bound with twine. Its title was not poetry. Field Guide to Not Being Feared Draft. He turned the pages the way a man tests unfamiliar stairs, carefully with the vertigo that comes when a building's load-bearing walls move and the roof does not collapse. "We will argue with this," he said. "Good," Rao answered. "Argue with your best selves in the room." The hard circle did not attend. They sent a message friendly enough to pass censors, "We wish you safe transit." They meant, "We will try later." The difference mattered less than it used to. Rumors run slower when maps have promises on them. Juno lingered by a railing where, a lifetime ago last week, he had pointed out a weakness in a formation intended to frighten him. He looked down at walkways that had been double-pinned for years but never honored for it. He looked up at a sky that would not miss him and decided that was exactly right. Rex cleared his throat. "Captain Cole," he said, wrestling ceremony into something it had not been built to carry. "You asked for directions." He handed her a data wafer stamped with seals that used to mean conquest and now, tentatively, meant context. "These are our charts. We pruned the traps. We left the warnings." Dana accepted them like a person accepts bread in a house learning to be generous. "We'll send ours," she said, "including the parts where we got small things wrong for big reasons and big things wrong for small reasons." Vekon looked at the ship and then at the crowd and made a different kind of declaration. "We will add a verse to the anthem," he said. "It will say that maps are not just places. They are promises you draw in public and keep in private." Somewhere in the plaza, a child repeated the word promise until it lost its edges and then found them again. Asteria powered up with the contented hum of a machine given good instructions. The ramp lifted. The Garden of Knives sang its thin song. The ship rose through a sky that had been taught for 8 centuries to hold only declarations and now tried, awkwardly but earnestly, to hold an agreement. In orbit, Rex's fleet did not close ranks around the human ship. They opened a lane because restraint is also choreography and deserves to be seen. On the bridge, Miguel set the return course. Juno checked the math, Dr. Rao watched Kark's prime shrink without gloating. Dana, who still believed in lists and laminated signs, added a line to the whiteboard that governed the corner of her mind reserved for rules that keep people alive. When lost, ask for directions. When afraid, make a plan. When offered power, build a process. Leave every map with a promise on it. The jump drive sighed like a held breath finally released. Stars rearranged themselves into the pattern the crew called home adjacent. On Kark's prime, a boy took a breath before singing the anthem and did not tremble. In a mine on Varan 9, a foreman pinned a new rail and logged it on a ledger that would be read by people who cared. In a quiet office, Serk filed a report that accused no one and repaired something important anyway. High above a world that used to confuse volume with meaning, the path Asteria cut through the dark looked ordinary to any sensor. To the people who had learned to see patterns, it looked like a line drawn by a steady hand. It looked like a map that intended to keep its word.